Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Cybersecurity Amplified and Intensified. Today we have with us Jeremy Kirk of the Ransomware Files, available on all major podcasting platforms. It is one of my new favorites, that and Intelligence Matters. Go check him out, like, subscribe, and me too, please. What's going on?
Not much. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. So I guess if you can just let the listeners and viewers know a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Jeremy Kirk. I'm an editor with Information Security Media Group, which is a publishing company that's based in Princeton, New Jersey. So they do information security events, and we also do online stories, and I do video interviews and audio interviews with security, interesting people in the security field. And I live in Sydney, Australia. So I'm their only employee in Australia. So I've been here about 10 years.
Very cool. So how did you get started with the Ransomware Files project?
You know, it's funny because I think you've probably listened to Darknet Diaries before.
Yes.
And Jack Rhysider's absolutely fantastic podcast. And I listened to that and I was like, oh, I just love it. I just love it, love it, love it. It's the audio storytelling. It was super interesting. It was about security. And I kind of thought, I want to do that. And of course, anybody who listens to Darknet Diaries goes, I want to do that, right? And realize, wait, it's actually really freaking hard. It sounds so easy to do. But what I thought was, I want to do a narrative podcast because I was interested in like different ways of telling stories. I've been traditionally kind of a print person, you know, going back a very long time. And, you know, with the advent of COVID and everything, started doing video interviews, really liked it, started doing more audio stuff. I was like, this is fun. So I thought, I want to have a narrative podcast, right? So then you got to figure out, well, what's it going to be about? And I thought, well, why don't I make a narrative podcast about ransomware? And I'll talk to people, organizations who were infected with ransomware and figure out what tips would they pass on to others? What struggles did they have, right? And so that, great, cool. God, that's a good topic. Nobody looks, looking at Apple Podcasts and everywhere. Nobody's done anything like this. There were some security ones that touched on ransomware, but there was nothing close to that. And then I was like, great, now I just got to find some people to, participate, right? And it just immediately hit a wall because nobody wants to talk about their ransomware infection. And I was thinking like, this is a crazy idea. How am I going to do this? Because nobody's going to want to talk about this. So eventually I found a guy in Ski in Washington who works in Bothell, Washington, and so he works for the North Shore School District. He's a classic Unix administrator, and he had done a talk at the Usenix conference in Washington D.C. about how his school district recovered from Ryuk. And his presentation was up, so he was the first one. I was like, "Hey, Ski, would you want to do this?" It's like I'm going to do it like a story, and so that was like the pilot was how this school district recovered from Ryuk, and then for 3 months I pitched organizations, and everybody said no. And I was like, I don't know if I'm going to do this. I wanted to make 6 episodes, right? Initially, I was like, that was my goal. I was like, I'll make a half dozen of these things if I can. Got the first one just dead, just absolute crickets approaching any other organization for like 12 weeks. And then I cold pitched an Australian company that they do the software and equipment to print like the best before dates on like beer and cheese. So they call themselves like an intelligent tracking service. Intelligent, like, I guess, basically they track the pallets of where things go. And if you have to recall like a pallet of yogurt because of a health concern, like their software is the one that makes that code, and it allows you to identify where it's gone. And they were hit by ransomware as well. And they were like, yeah, we'll do it. The CEO had a background in technology. So I thought, oh, he's probably a good person to approach because he's going to really conceptually understand this. And it was a fantastic episode. It was super interesting. They had a really interesting recovery story, but, really it's kind of intended to focus on the positive. There's a lot of ransomware is always like, this company got infected, this company paid. It's always a lot of shame, in media stories. And I don't think it should be like that. It's like these events can be existential events for companies, right? And like the last thing you should be doing is going to Conti's website and going, look whose data has been dumped. I'm going to write a story about it, because that's not really helping the problem. What's helping the problem is, or what can help solve the problem is like sharing these experiences of like, how did you recover? Because you have a really interesting situation. You're a wastewater plant in Virginia, or you're a manufacturing company in Australia. How did you, walk me through what happened? How did you communicate with your board? How did you communicate with your customers? And there's all kinds of interesting bits that I think are really helpful beyond just, shaming people.
It's interesting that you say that, because I'm not going to say I was above the name and shame. I would go to the sites. I would say, okay, who in my neighborhood got hit? Neighborhood meaning the state. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you're a competitor of mine. Let's figure out which of your clients got listed. Let me call them and say, hey, your provider got hit. You want a new provider? And then one day I sat there. It's a douche move. I admit it. Regret it. I did it like 2 or 3 times, but I sat there and I had this epiphany moment where it was like, by me doing this, I'm not helping me. I'm not helping the end customer who got hit. The only person I'm helping is the ransomware group.
Yeah.
Because of that shame and that fear, they can prey on people, and that's probably going to help them get hit. And I don't know if you're on LinkedIn, but how many IT people are you connected to on LinkedIn? Not a lot. Well, I guess let me qualify that. Are you connected to a lot of people? A couple hundred? A couple dozen?
Hundreds, probably in the thousands by this point.
So when there's a new breach vulnerability, what's your feed filled with?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's a lot of like, it's weird if you look at this from like a publishing perspective too. It's like, well, my line is like, look, if Toyota comes out and says, hey, we've got to shut down our production line because of a cyber attack, which is actually probably most likely a ransomware attack against one of our suppliers, I think that's a newsworthy event, right? If the company's coming forward. What I really despise is people going to leak sites and tweeting about new victims, right? Because because we know how this works, right? It's like they come in your systems, they steal your sensitive data, then they encrypt. And like, if you don't buy the key, they press you. So like, well, we're going to dump your personal data of your employees. And I'm just like, I don't understand. Like, why would you make a scene about that? You're taking a photo of a car accident, right? And tweeting about it. Like, you wouldn't do that, would you? So why would you do this to it?
That's a really good comparison for people to think about with this stuff, because by keeping that stigma of shame on ransomware, you're only helping the ransomware groups.
Absolutely.
You're not doing anything to make anything better. What I'm tired of is the constant regurgitation on the LinkedIns or any of these other social-ish media platforms where everyone's posting the same thing. And it's because what I think happened, and I don't know if you've noticed this, but I think the average non-technical person is getting incredibly desensitized to ransomware, because it's what they see every day, all day from, I guess, my peers or me at some point.
Yeah. I mean, I think the, data breaches and the whole privacy thing. I mean, I think that ship has kind of sailed, because there's just been so much data and all of our personal data that's gotten out. I think like, you're absolutely right. It's desensitized people to it. Now, that said, I mean, I think that there's, particularly in the United States, there's need for stronger privacy legislation, because it's always, you need that. It's crucial for people to trust electronic services, to know that there are going to be repercussions for poor information security practices, right? And that's ultimately what we want. We want companies to be accountable and realize that this is something you need to invest in. And I think that's, if there has been one positive thing about ransomware, it's that a lot of companies are realizing that, right, we have to get our shops in order. Otherwise, we're not going to be in business. And then maybe perhaps the downstream benefit of that is probably better overall security for, personal data that's held by companies. It's like, at least that's going to be, because if you're protected against ransomware, you're probably going to be less liable to, lose data as well.
I've seen the opposite of that, actually. I've seen
really?
I've seen a lot of companies say, we don't want to spend this. We've always spent, a couple $100 a month. Why do we need to spend $1,500 a month for this? But I'm just throwing numbers out here. But what I have seen is when a company gets breached and insurance is picking up the tab, they'll spend for anything. They'll be like, yeah, let's get the best AV. Let's get the best firewall. Let's configure it properly. Let's use MFA.
Yeah.
Once that checkbook stops cutting checks for them, you see it's almost predictable how they begin shedding all of
Yeah.
policies and procedures that they brought into place post incident.
That's interesting. I mean, I think cyber insurance, like, that's a whole huge topic in and of itself. I mean, I think it's interesting. Like, I think that's going to change in the fact that like companies aren't going to be able to just go, oh, I've got a cyber insurance policy, I can just not do the basics, because now the policy limits are coming down, the cost of insurance is going up. Insurers are also making their potential clients meet baseline cybersecurity standards before they even grant policies. So I think like this is good. It's like, if you want to get insured, you have to make sure you're following, all these kind of like CISA kind of basic guidelines, MFA, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's good, but I don't think companies are going to be able to be so, I guess, lackadaisical. Yeah, just like, oh, my insurance will cover it. It's like, well, you're going to hit your coverage limit pretty quick, and after that, it's on you. Hopefully, that's my hope.
I've noticed something very interesting for my customers that are in our managed services program. For those watching, those are air quotes. When we have to fill out an application form for cyber liability insurance, we provide backing up data. We provide what control it's mapped to. We like the CIS controls, version 8. So we give that binder / PDF to the underwriter with the application. And on the application, we say, see page so-and-so or paragraph or whatever. And they hate that, because what I've noticed is they want you to self-attest that you're doing all these things, so that when a breach comes around, they can then ask you for the proof that you did it. And if you didn't, they can deny your claim. So
I think the self-attestation too is, I mean, I guess I'd be interested. Like, are insurers also asking, amongst your clients, are they asking like, show us your last penetration test, show us some documentation, audits?
They don't want that. What they want is for you to say yes or no. Whatever your answer is, they want it, but they don't want proof of it. And to me, it's a bit disingenuous, because it should be like I don't like compliance because I think it's all check boxes. I think if you're going for cyber liability insurance and they say, do you have MFA? You should be giving them data to back up how your MFA is configured or what you're using for MFA, and go down the list. Otherwise, a lot of companies are going to think that they're protected. And if push comes to shove, their claims will be denied.
Oh, yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I haven't really encountered anybody it's just kind of like talking about insurance too is always, very, very kind of touchy. I mean, I will tell you, like, the couple of people I've talked to for the podcast, a couple of organizations that had cyber insurance, it totally pulled them out of the muck. I mean, it helps. It helped them get back on their feet way faster than they would have been able to.
Oh, of course.
Particularly that Australian company that I was referring to. It's like they were able to get people and resources in to help, immediately help rebuild, and data recovery specialists. And it was just, companies, like, they still don't conceptually realize like how bad it's going to be. They always kind of think, oh, we put this money into cybersecurity, and they realize that cyber criminals don't care how much how much you've invested in it. They're just looking for that one mistake, right? And that's enough. You probably do. Yeah.
I remember one of your episodes, I don't know if your last one or maybe it was your second to last episode, was on the Maersk ransomware.
Yes.
And one of the most impressive things about that whole situation is the insurance company losing their claim that it's a act of war.
Oh, right. Yeah. I didn't include that in the episode. But yeah, right. Because there was there was another victim of a victim of NotPetya.
Yeah.
Whose claim was denied, and I forget now
it was Maersk.
I think it was a different company. But anyway, I'm familiar with what you're talking about. Yeah, and they claimed that the insurance denied them because they claimed NotPetya was an act of war,
right.
And it's kind of
by
like
a nation state.
By a nation state, and it's like, well, what's war? What's cyber war, right? It opens up all this gigantic can of worms.
The language of the policy didn't clearly define what that would have been, which I guarantee you, the moment they got that judgment, that entire language was ripped apart, done. for the next one.
Yes. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's probably not great for the insurance industry. Like, I mean, who's going to buy a policy that says like, if you're attacked in this, because that was a very abstract attack, right? Like, we don't know. We know that it was aimed at this Ukrainian accounting provider. We don't know if the intention of the GRU, because that's who the U.S. Department of Justice, they indicted 6 GRU agents for the NotPetya attack. We don't know if that was just we created a cyber weapon that just got out of hand, or we don't care that it got out of hand. All the above. I mean, who knows, right? But it's like when you have, and that's the weird thing about, I guess, risk in cyber is that you can be way downstream of something that's happening. And that's been the fear of what's going on right now between Ukraine and Russia. There's great fears that Russia might use some sort of cyber, malware that gets out of hand and has a bunch of collateral victims around the world. But it does raise a good question of like, well, is your insurance going to cover this? Like, I think it should. I feel like it should. Like, right? Like, if it's
going to be like the terrorism rider here. If you don't pay the extra fee for it, you're not going to get covered. They'll offer it because insurance companies will always figure out a way to get their money.
Yeah,
they're not going to lose.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. Well, charge me for it, and I'll decide whether I want to pay for it or not. But don't post incident. Don't come back to me and say, "Yeah, we're not going to cover that." Because
it's if you look at what the terrorism coverage costs relative to a general E&O policy, it's not that much more, but a lot of people forego.
Yeah.
So, what are you working on for the next episode?
So, episode 5 was about Texas and REvil. So if you remember what happened in Texas, there was a very small MSP that did a lot of work for Texas governments, and their systems were corrupted or basically infected by REvil, which then used their RMM software to infect all of these cities. So that incident was probably like the biggest one in 2019, or at least one of the biggest. So I'm doing a sister episode to that one, which also involves REvil and Kaseya. And so there's strong parallels between these two incidents. Both were REvil, both were arguably kind of supply chain style. I know people bicker over what's a supply chain attack and what's not, but I think you could put those in the same bucket as a supply chain style attack. The U.S. Department of Justice announced the indictments for 2 men on the same day for both of those attacks, which has made a lot of people feel really good, because those were both enormous incidents, and a lot of ransomware incidents just result in absolutely nothing on the law enforcement side. So I thought that those would pair together really, really well. So now I'm working on the Kaseya episode. I hope to have it out by the end of the month. But it's a really, as we all know, it's a really complicated story. It's a really crazy story. And it's one that I'm really looking forward to telling, because I've got a lot of great people that are going to be in it.
I think my listeners here know that I'm no fan of Kaseya, so I am waiting. I'm impatiently waiting for you to drop that episode, because anything I can find out would be fantastic.
Yeah. Look, I mean, the podcast, I try to really make it like an accurate representation of events, and not let it be grievance based, because there's a lot of, ransomware can leave a lot of bitter taste in people's mouths depending on what end you're on it. But I'm happy to say for this episode, Kaseya is going to participate, which is great, because I really wanted them to give their perspective on what happened as well. And the episode is about looking forward and how do we stop these things, and what have MSPs learned. So I think there's definitely, I've got 2 MSPs in it, possibly a third is going to be in it as well. And these were MSPs whose downstream customers were dramatically affected by this. In fact, one of them had, I think, all of his customers, which were like 80 customers, all of them were infected. But they have a great story because they had good backups. And so they were able to get back on their feet pretty quick. So, all of these things, that episode is really going to tell, some intricacies about this attack and sort of how people, how people recovered. So
that was one of the interesting things about this REvil attack. They're really well known for annihilating backups and backup systems. But I don't know, Kaseya customers got incredibly lucky that backups were left intact on this one.
Yeah. And so the question is, well, why? why didn't REvil delete shadow copies? Why didn't they exfil data before? Those were the two big things. They didn't exfil before, and they didn't delete shadow copies. So why did this happen? So there's some theories about it, right? And this kind of goes back to how Kaseya's VSA product was exploited in the first place. So we know, and this is all public stuff. Back in April of 2021, the Dutch group DIVD researchers told Kaseya that they found, a lot of serious vulnerabilities, and Kaseya was in the process of trying to patch those prior to that July 2nd, 2021 attack. We know that REvil somehow discovered the authentication bypass in VSA for on-premises VSA, and that's kicked off the attack. Kaseya was really, really close to patching, but they figured it out first. And this is just kind of like a really extraordinary kind of situation. So one theory is that maybe REvil, they figured out the bug. They thought, oh, Kaseya's going to patch this quick. We just got to hit it, and they hit it in a really automated way. Just skipped over exfilling data because that takes a bunch of time and could raise alarms. Skipped over deleting shadow copies. We're like, right, we're just going to hit everybody as fast as we can because we know this is going to be closed really quick. I think that's a pretty viable theory that they just hurried up and just did it while the window of opportunity was open. But luckily, that helped a lot of people. Yeah. It was really, it was really quite an oversight by REvil, but one that helped out a lot of people. And just to go back to episode 5 with Texas, there's something similar that happened too. Like when REvil got into the MSP's Screen Connect, there were like 23 systems, one each belonging to every city. And then the 24th was the actual Screen Connect server that they were using to push the ransomware to all the things, and they accidentally encrypted that server that they were using, right? So it just shut down their attack. They couldn't get in anymore. And again, that was just another, kind of dumb thing that the attackers did that helped out. It meant that because like that little MSP in Texas, they did services for like cities in Florida and elsewhere. I didn't even realize this until later. They had a bunch of other clients. It could have been far, far worse. But because the attackers encrypted the own system that they were using, that stopped it, right? And so the damage was limited at that point. They cut off their access point. So again, it's like a lot of these things, like they just get like lucky breaks because attackers are just like, I don't know, they just make mistakes, luckily.
A lot of it is these attackers living off the land. So when they see the opportunity, they're going to go for it. And if they think, maybe they knew Kaseya was very close to patching, or maybe they thought Kaseya was very close to patching, so they executed and took what they could have gotten.
Yeah, right.
I know you may want to keep this close to your vest for the release of the podcast, but are you going to, let me phrase this easily for you so you can say piss off, or any information on how Kaseya got the master decryptor?
Look, I'll tell you right now that is... that's like confidential information, but and so I can't. That nobody will tell me that. I mean, that of course would be interesting, but I think one bit to look at in respects to that is that a couple of weeks ago we saw the big Conti leaks, right? And so there were security researchers up in that group's Jabber server for ages, and we know, at least in the Kaseya incident, we know from the Washington Post that published a story that basically it was either the FBI or one of its partners or a security company. They got into REvil systems, right? So, nobody will say that on the record. But ransomware crims have terrible OPSEC. They make mistakes all the time. And I think what's happened in the last year or so is that, governments like Australia and the US and elsewhere are saying like, yeah, we're going to go after you offensively. And that was the Kaseya, that incident was the first sort of real example of offensive action against ransomware criminals, because the FBI and its partners or whoever, that key was obtained almost within a day or two of the incident actually happening. And if you look at like what happened leading up to Kaseya, right, you had Colonial, that was DarkSide, but DarkSide was an affiliate that was pretty close to REvil. You had JBS Foods, and then you had Kaseya, right? So, Revel had been waving its arms like, look at us, we're a bunch of flagrant cyber criminals. And I think law enforcement, everybody said, no, this isn't going to happen again, and it happened again. And they're like, they were ready next time it happened to get that key. And of course, there's more another fascinating part of the Kaseya story is that, the FBI held the key for 3 weeks because they were working on, kind of a clandestine action against the group. And there was some controversy over, well, should they have released the key sooner? And there's lots of opinions about that. But it's a fascinating situation. And it just goes to show how difficult it is to fight these groups, or it actually shows you a real law enforcement success. Getting the key was a big success. And it shows that, hey, these efforts will work over time, and they will.
What are your thoughts on, now, preface this, I've always been under the belief that ransomware groups are far more dynamic than we are as protectors. With Conti being breached, Weevil being breached, DarkSide, or Dark Matter.
Dark
whoever had their crypto taken away by the FBI. Do you think they are smart enough to begin subverting some of these actions in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody learns from their mistakes. I think at the same time, there's always kind of probably the fact that, ransomware criminals are working in places where we haven't seen a whole lot of law enforcement action. We did see Russia arrest, I forget how many, I think it was probably 14 rebel people or affiliates,
two or three roundups in the days running up to Ukraine.
Yeah. So I think that will spur some deterrence, perhaps, but I still think they're operating really, and they will continue to operate in a vacuum where it's just really easy to not have a lot of fear and not have a lot of worry. And yeah, everybody's gonna, with every thing that happens on the law enforcement side, they're going to get better and probably take some more protections. But then again, it's just like that sort of game that, attackers and defenders are always sort of playing. Like, attackers are always going to get a little bit better. Defenders are going to get a little bit better too. Offensive people are going to get a little bit better. And there's always some little wrinkle in all of it that, that it's just that's just kind of the game. But I don't think that they'll get to the point where they'll be indefeatable, I think there'll always be opportunity.
It's just going to be a perpetual game of mouse.
Yeah.
Conti, their servers were breached or what have you a couple of weeks ago, and they're back to shaming and claiming victims. So
yeah, I think everybody hoped, and we also saw some of those accounts too that there were these anonymous Twitter accounts popping up with photos of Russian men who supposedly were linked to Nix in those Conti leaks. Now, whether that is accurate, who knows? Whether those men are affiliated with the FSB, as some have suggested, is thus unproven. Right. I think from what's been shown so far, I think you have to look at that really critically. And it's easy to get kind of, we know what happened. All that comes from the Yahoo stuff, years ago when it was, it's shown that there was contact between some of the LinkedIn breacher, the guy who breached LinkedIn, and I think the guy who breached Yahoo. It was shown that there was some interaction with the Russian government. So I think it's easy to get kind of whipped up about this kind of stuff, but I don't think there's been any definitive link to say, yeah, these people are definitively linked with the FSB, or it's have to be very careful. I think with attribution and doxing people, and I think that's another.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just the last point. I think that's another thing too about security researchers just kind of dumping stuff, because there might be law enforcement action pending, and that might screw it up if you're dumping photos of people and their birth dates and photos of their passport. I get it. People want to get attention for their research, but I also think that maybe you should just share that with law enforcement if you think that, not stick it on Twitter, because it might screw everything up. Yeah. If they have pending actions.
But the question is, on some of the countries, it's unlikely that you're giving it to law enforcement is going to do any good.
Very true. Very true. I think, the U.S., particularly over the years, especially with the Chinese government, they've just basically named people and put people in indictments, and they know that they'll never charge them. But I think that does help deterrence, absolutely, because I don't think anybody wants to be permanently on the FBI's most wanted list, even if they are in Russia or China. I think that's, it's you can't leave your country for the rest of your life, basically.
Some of those people were never leaving anyway.
Yeah, very true. Very true. I mean, maybe they don't care,
Yeah.
so
They're living it. A lot of these guys, if they really are state sponsored to a degree, they live in the lap of luxury as long as they're still of use to whatever agency is using them.
sure. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The one thing I'm scared for with all the ransomware arrests and especially the extraditions from, there have been a lot from Korea, Ukraine, and Israel, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
It's going to make these guys stop traveling eventually, and they're going to stay in Russia or countries that are willing to turn a blind eye. And how do you stop them at that point? I'm not saying stop extradition by any means, but that's going to be a side effect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no extradition treaty between the U.S. and Russia. There's never been. So, I mean, there's just even the current conflict with Ukraine aside, there's never a chance that these people were going to, face justice. Although they did get Kaczynski, the guy for Kaseya, because he crossed into Poland. Yeah. So now he's in Texas. Right there.
There was another extradition of a Canadian gentleman who was associated with dark matter.
It was Netwalker. I think.
Netwalker, dark. I think they're all the same. They just switched.
It's hard to keep track of the linkages and names. Yeah. I mean, I struggle with it too, honestly. But that's another victory too. I mean, and that's kind of it was interesting that he was just in Canada running ransomware. But that's great. It's great because I think like probably even too like people who are in Western countries getting in on ransomware, like that's probably really, really risky.
That's a good no for them, quite honestly.
Yeah,
it's like okay, if you're gonna do it. It's one. I think it's one. I hate to say this. It's one thing if you're doing it in the Far East, than if you're doing it here in the West. So. Yeah. So anything else? What else do you have planned for the ransomware files after the Kaseya story, or is that number 6 and done?
That's going to be number 6. Well, my goal, like I said, my goal was to hit 6, but actually I think there's some more stories I'd like to tell. I think I'd like to tell one around Conti because that's still just such a huge prolific gang. And I think I could, sorry?
2 billion, I think they collected their main wallet. That's recent.
Oh, good Lord.
4 billion, I think it was.
It's enormous amounts of money. And it's enormous amounts of money. I mean, like I think I can hit 10 episodes, and I think what I really want to get though, I really want to get an organization that paid, right? So everybody that I've spoken to has not paid. A couple said paying was potentially on the table at first, but once they calmed down, looked at their backup situation, had a good forensics analysis, they said, it wasn't on our radar then at that point. But I would like to get an organization that paid because, I mean, I think morally Payne is really vexed, right? You don't want to give cyber criminals more money because that just emboldens them. But also, if you're like a company that has like 60 employees and like you're literally going to go out of business unless you get this decryption key, I can understand why you would pay. And I think, to look at it from the perspective of, is it better for this company to go out of business, or is it better to give cyber criminals money? And I think sometimes it's probably better to give cyber criminals money, maybe in some cases, but overall, generally, I think we have to stop paying them though. That's the big thing, because when they stop getting paid, they will stop this. They'll move on to, the old school banking malware and DEC.
There's someone you should speak to, Matt, or you can look him up on YouTube, Cyber Matt Lee. Matt, I'm calling you out, buddy. Sorry. He is all about raising the tide of IT providers so that you can get customers to really not have to pay. Have your stuff to a point where your backups work. You have an incident response plan. So that would be an interesting conversation for you, I think.
Yeah. Well, I got a question for you. I mean, since you run an MSP, I mean, what's the state of your clients' backups, and how concerned are they about ransomware?
So backups have taken a really interesting turn for me. Because it's the SMB, there's a lot more SaaS applications, and we have the ability to back those up. So in essence, two things we're left to back up are the Microsoft 365 tenancy, whatever's in email, SharePoint, OneDrive, and QuickBooks, if you're using on the desktop version.
What is that again?
QuickBooks.
Okay. Yep.
the accounting platform. Other than that, in the SMB, there's not much need for backups anymore, quite honestly, outside of those two scenarios. And a lot of companies are going to QuickBooks Online. So again, we're losing the ability to back that up, and we have to rely on QuickBooks and not have a mess.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's positive. I mean, SaaS can definitely help. I mean, it's a lot of these incidents are centered on, the stuff that you have on-prem, right? That gets encrypted. Like that's a lot of the.
How long before the ransomware operators realize, wait, there's no data on-prem anymore? Let's go after these cloud providers who've been offering features and not security.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to name any names because I quite honestly, I couldn't legitimately name a SaaS provider that has really poor security, but just imagine, pick any of the big CRM companies out there. If they're cloud hosted and they get breached and all the files get ransomed and there's no backup left, their business is gone and thousands of their customers' businesses are gone.
Yeah.
And I think the next iteration for SaaS is going to be for the big providers to allow the users to back up their data, whether it's a manual download, or a download that gets emailed to them, some version of that, because we can't keep trusting the SaaS companies to keep the only copy of our data.
Sure. And that's another thing about cloud, using cloud services, is that you don't know how good their security is on the other side, right? It's just a black box on the internet that you're using, that you have
else's computer.
It's somebody else's computer, and it's like, it has security benefits, but there's also just things that you're never going to see, until later, until you hear about something bad happening. And you're just, that's where your trust is. And well, you have to trust something. Do you trust yourself? Do you trust your cloud provider? Who do you trust more? Well, everybody can make a mistake. So
can you imagine what would happen if a company like Salesforce got breached? I don't wish it on them. This is not me wishing, but just because of their scale, if all of the data was lost, it would be game over for a lot of different businesses and a lot of different industries.
Yeah. I mean, I would think that a company of that scale would have, a very rigorous backup regime and disaster recovery. And, but yeah, I mean, who predicted SolarWinds or Kaseya? I mean, in theory, people would say like, this is a possibility. But I think until it actually happens, you're like, whoa, that's an interesting, devastating vector,
Exactly. And I think that's going to be the next iteration of ransomware.
Yeah, I kind of predict, like, I don't know. I think it's all Windows focused now. So I think when I was listening to Patrick Gray's Risky Business podcast, like few months ago, and they were talking about the possibility of ransomware on Linux, because there's been some ransomware for Linux, but it's never really kind of taken off. It's like Windows is just like the lowest hanging fruit. You got Active Directory, which is great to get into if you're an attacker.
It's the consumer's choice, and the consumer's never going to secure it the way, an IT professional should. So it's low hanging fruit, I would say.
Yeah. If you look at like Linux, I mean, across the enterprise landscape, I mean, that, there's a huge open opportunity there for a whole new wave of, ransomware on a different platform. And
see that with the new FatPipe vulnerability on, was it Linux or Unix? I think it is.
Oh, is this a Dirty Pipe, you mean?
Dirty Pipe, sorry.
Yeah, Dirty Pipe. Yeah. That was a very interesting one. I mean, I think you have to already be on the system to use that. But I mean, once you get in, it's like, it's a very powerful vulnerability. Yeah.
People don't protect the physical access to a lot of their systems. So once they get in, it's a free for all for people. So that's going to be make for an interesting summer, I think.
Yeah.
But that's it from my end, unless there's anything else you wanted to go over.
No, it's great. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
Cool. Thank you so much for coming on, ladies and gentlemen. Jeremy Kurek of the Ransomware Files. How can they get in contact with you if you want to get in contact with you?
Yes, absolutely. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. The podcast is called The Ransomware Files. It's on most of the major podcast platforms. So leave a review, leave a rating.